The words still felt like daggers in my heart when I replayed them in my mind. "We think it's best if you don't come around for a while, Mom," my son Nathan said, his wife Melanie standing beside him with arms crossed and a satisfied smirk barely hidden behind a mask of concern. My own son, the boy I'd raised alone for 25 years after his father abandoned us, now stood in the doorway of the colonial home I had secretly paid the mortgage on for the past 3 years, telling me I wasn't welcome anymore. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Nathan didn't know as he closed that door in my face was that I had just transferred $2,150 to their mortgage company that morning, the latest in a series of payments totaling over $102,000 that I'd been quietly making to keep a roof over their heads. Payments that would stop immediately. That was the moment I realized my son had become someone I no longer recognized. And perhaps the most painful truth of all, he had never really seen me. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments below, and if this story touches something in your own experience, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something special about what happened at the 1-year mark that nobody saw coming. It had been a chilly October afternoon when I drove to Nathan and Melanie's house in Oak Ridge Estates, the upscale neighborhood they couldn't actually afford. The leaves had just started to turn, painting the tree-lined streets in brilliant oranges and reds that normally brought me joy. But that day, my stomach was in knots. I'd been sensing the growing tension over the past few months, the shortened phone calls, the canceled dinners, the way Melanie would roll her eyes whenever I offered a suggestion about anything. I pulled into their driveway, noticing the new landscaping and the luxury SUV that had recently appeared. All purchases that didn't align with what I knew about Nathan's marketing manager salary. But I had kept my concerns to myself, just as I had kept my financial support a secret. "Hi, Mom," Nathan said when he opened the door. But he didn't move, aside to let me in as he normally would. Melanie appeared behind him, perfectly dressed as always, her manicured hand resting possessively on my son's shoulder. "Hi, Evelyn," she said, using my first name as she had since the day they got engaged, despite my gentle reminders that I preferred Mom or even Mrs. Donovan. "Is everything okay?" I asked, noticing how Nathan couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I brought that book on gardening we talked about, and some of those heirloom tomato seedlings from my greenhouse." I held up the gift bag, but neither of them reached for it. "Actually, Mom, we need to talk," Nathan said, finally looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager trying to wriggle out of responsibility for a broken window. "Some things have come up, and Melanie and I have been discussing boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated, feeling the first chill of what was coming. "We're trying to establish our independence as a couple," Melanie interjected, her voice carrying that patronizing tone she used when explaining things she deemed beyond my understanding. "We feel that your visits have become too frequent and, frankly, a bit intrusive." "I come over once a week for Sunday dinner," I said quietly. "That's hardly intrusive." "It's not just the visits," Nathan said, looking to Melanie as if for approval. "It's the constant opinions about how we should manage our household, our finances." "I mentioned once that those granite countertops seemed expensive," I said, my defenses rising. "That was hardly constant criticism." "See, that's exactly it," Melanie said with an exaggerated sigh. "You always have some comment about our choices, our lifestyle. Nathan and I are doing very well, and we don't need anyone questioning our decisions." I looked at my son, searching for some recognition of how unfair this characterization was, but he just stared at the doorframe. "We think it's best if you don't come around for a while, Mom," he finally said. "Just until we figure things out. Maybe a few months." "A few months?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "But Thanksgiving is next month. Christmas follows shortly after." We're actually thinking of going to Aspen for the holidays, Melanie said, not even attempting to hide her smile now. My parents have a condo there, and they've invited us. It'll be good for Nathan to experience a real family Christmas tradition. The implication that our traditions, the ones I'd maintained through years of working double shifts as a nurse, scrimping and saving to make sure Nathan never felt the absence of his father during the holidays, weren't real, struck me like a physical blow. I see, I managed, my hands tightening around the gift bag handles. And this is what you want, Nathan? He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. We need this space, Mom. Melanie's right. We're establishing our own household, our own traditions. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the reality that I was being erased from my son's life by a woman who had known him for barely 3 years. 3 years compared to the 25 years I had devoted to him. The midnight fevers, the science, projects, the college application essays, the countless sacrifices no one but a parent would make. Well then, I said, setting the gift bag gently on their porch. I'll respect your wishes. As I turned to leave, Melanie called after me. We can still do phone calls, though. Maybe a scheduled time every other week? I didn't respond. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I made a decision that would change everything between us. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic payment to Westview Mortgage Company that had been scheduled for the following month. Then I called my financial advisor. Richard, I said when he answered, I need to cancel the arrangement we've had regarding my son's mortgage, immediately. Are you sure, Evelyn? Richard asked, concern evident in his voice. You've been helping them for 3 years now. I'm sure, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. It's time Nathan and Melanie experienced the real independence they're so eager to establish. As I drove away from the house my money had secured for them, a strange sense of lightness began to replace the initial hurt. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first, my feelings, my worth, my future. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a sense of possibility. What would life look like if I stopped pouring my resources, emotional and financial, into a relationship that offered so little in return? What would Evelyn Donovan do with her time, her love, her money, if they weren't funneled toward keeping Nathan and Melanie comfortable in a lifestyle beyond their means? I was about to find out, and so were they. The mortgage payment for their beautiful colonial and Oak Ridge estates was due in exactly 2 weeks. Without my contribution, they would be $2,850 short. The truth I had kept hidden for 3 years was about to become painfully clear, and I felt no obligation to warn them. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their choices. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is walking away when you're not valued. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was 42 when Nathan was born. My miracle baby after years of thinking motherhood might never happen for me. Thomas and I had almost given up hope when those 2 pink lines appeared on the pregnancy test. I still remember holding Nathan for the first time, this tiny, perfect human with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to recognize me immediately. He knows you're his mom, the nurse had said, and in that moment, I made a silent promise that I would give him the world. When Nathan was 4, Thomas left us for his 27-year-old assistant. The divorce was messy and painful, but I was determined not to let it affect Nathan's life. I picked up extra nursing shifts at Memorial Hospital, working nights and weekends to maintain our home in Pine Hollow, ensuring Nathan could stay in the same preschool with his friends. Thomas's child support checks became increasingly sporadic as he started a new family with Jessica, and eventually stopped altogether when he relocated to Seattle. Why can't I have the new Xbox like Kyle? 7-year-old Nathan would ask, his eyes wide with that innocent childhood longing. I'd smile and tell him we were saving for something even more special, even as I calculated how many extra hours I'd need to work to afford it for his birthday. That became our pattern. I would find a way, always, to give Nathan what he needed, and, whenever possible, what he wanted too. I worked holidays for the triple pay, traded shifts to never miss a school event, and learned to repair household appliances from YouTube videos to avoid replacement costs. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw Nathan thriving. I remember the day Nathan was accepted to Westlake University. He came running into the kitchen waving the acceptance letter. "Mom, I got in," he shouted, throwing his arms around me. I held him tight, my heart swelling with pride even as my mind raced through calculations. A private university meant liquidating my retirement fund, but seeing the joy on his face, I knew it was worth it. "How are we going to afford this?" he asked later that night, a moment of reality breaking through the excitement. "Don't worry about that," I told him, smoothing his hair like I used to when he was little. "I've been saving for your education since you were born." It wasn't entirely true. I'd been saving, yes, but nowhere near enough. What I didn't tell him was that I would be taking out a second mortgage on our home, or that I would be working overtime shifts in the ICU at age 60 to make it happen. The college years flew by in a blur of tuition payments, care packages, and weekend visits whenever. I could manage the 5-hour drive to Westlake. While other parents were building their retirement funds, I was building Nathan's future. My colleague Sarah noticed the dark circles under my eyes one day during a particularly grueling shift and asked if everything was all right. "Just burning the midnight oil," I said with a weak smile. "Evelyn, you've been burning it for years," she replied, her voice kind but concerned. "At some point, you need to think about yourself too." I brushed off her concern. "Nathan graduates next year. Then I'll slow down." But life rarely goes according to plan. After graduation, Nathan moved to Millfield for a marketing position that paid barely enough to cover his share of a cramped apartment with 2 roommates. "Mom, I can't make rent this month," became a regular call, and each time I would transfer the money, tightening my own budget a little more. "You need to start saying no, Evie," my sister Patricia told me over coffee one Sunday. "He's an adult. Now, he needs to figure things out on his own." "It's just until he gets established," I insisted. "The marketing industry is tough to break into." Patricia gave me a look I'd come to know well, equal parts concern and exasperation. "You've been saying that for 3 years now. When does it end?" I didn't have an answer for her then. The truth was, I didn't know how to stop being the person who solved all of Nathan's problems. It had been my identity for so long that I wasn't sure who I would be without it. When Nathan met Melanie Winters at a charity gala 4 years ago, something shifted. Suddenly, the calls for financial help became less frequent. He was being wined and dined by a beautiful pharmaceutical sales rep whose family had deep roots in Millfield society. Melanie came from money, old money, the kind that didn't need to be flashy because its presence was understood. When Nathan brought her home to Pine Hollow for Thanksgiving, I noticed how he watched her, seeking approval for everything from his choice of wine to his opinions on politics. "Melanie thinks I should move into management," he told me as we washed dishes after dinner. "She says there's more growth potential and better networking." "And what do you think?" I asked, passing him a plate to dry. He looked surprised by the question. "Well, she would know, wouldn't she? Her family knows everyone who's anyone in Millfield." Bit my tongue. My independent son, who had once declared he would never let anyone dictate his career, was now eagerly following Melanie's guidance. But he was happy, happier than I'd seen him in years, so I kept my concerns to myself. The engagement came after 18 months of dating, with a ring that I knew instantly cost more than Nathan's modest salary could afford. "Mom, I'm engaged," Nathan called me, his voice breathless with excitement. I proposed at sunset on the harbor. The ring is incredible, a 2-carat cushion cut with a diamond halo. Melanie's father helped me choose it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. We're thinking about a house in Oak Ridge Estates, he continued, not noticing my momentary silence. Melanie says her parents can help with the down payment through their connections. Oak Ridge Estates. I knew the neighborhood well. Exclusive, pristine, with homes starting at prices that would take Nathan years to afford on his current salary. But I said nothing about that. That sounds perfect, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Whatever makes you happy, Nathan. The next day, without telling anyone, I drove to Oak Ridge Estates. The homes were everything Nathan had described. Elegant colonials and Tudors on manicured lots, a community pool, and a small private park. I could imagine Nathan and Melanie there, perhaps starting a family someday, my grandchildren playing in that park. As I drove slowly through the neighborhood, I spotted an open house sign and, on impulse, turned into the driveway. The house was a beautiful colonial with black shutters and a welcoming front porch. Inside, hardwood floors gleamed, and sunlight poured through large windows into a spacious living room. The real estate agent, a polished woman named Vanessa Cooper, explained that the owners were relocating and motivated to sell quickly. When I casually asked about typical financing, her response confirmed what I already suspected. A home in this neighborhood would stretch Nathan's budget well beyond breaking point, even with help on the down payment. 2 weeks later, Nathan called in a panic. Mom, the deal with Melanie's parents fell through. They're only willing to help with half the down payment, and the bank says we don't qualify for a mortgage large enough for Oak Ridge. The disappointment in his voice broke my heart. I could hear Melanie in the background, her tone sharp with frustration. Let me see what I can do, I found myself saying before I'd even processed the implications. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small kitchen, calculator in hand, running the numbers over and over. I had some savings, not much, but some. And there was the modest inheritance from my mother, which I'd been holding on to for retirement. If I took on extra weekend shifts and cut back on every non-essential expense, maybe, just maybe, I could help make Nathan's dream come true. The next morning, I called Richard Blackwood, my financial advisor since Thomas and I had divorced. Richard, I need to discuss helping my son with a house purchase, I said when he answered. Evelyn, he replied, concern evident in his voice. Is this about Nathan buying in that upscale neighborhood he mentioned to me at your Christmas party? Because those homes are significantly beyond what he should be financing on his income. It's important to him, Richard, and to his fiancée. Richard was quiet for a moment. This is about Melanie, isn't it? I didn't answer, which was answer. Enough. I can structure something, he finally said. But Evelyn, promise me you'll be careful. You're approaching retirement age, and your resources aren't unlimited, I promised, though we both knew it was a promise I was unlikely to keep. I had been putting Nathan first for 25 years, finding reserves of energy and determination I didn't know I possessed. This was just one more sacrifice, one more way to ensure his happiness. 3 days later, I signed paperwork that would channel funds through an LLC to supplement Nathan's mortgage payments, making it appear to the bank that his income was sufficient to qualify for the loan. The arrangement was perfectly legal. I would simply be making a significant portion of their monthly payment without appearing directly on the mortgage. As I drove home from Richard's office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For once, I would be the hero in Nathan's story, not Melanie, not her father with his connections and society friends. Me, Evelyn Donovan, the mother who had worked tirelessly behind the scenes for 25 years to make her son's dreams come true. What I didn't realize then was that my grand gesture was about to become the catalyst for the most painful chapter of our relationship. The house closing happened quickly. Nathan and Melanie moved into their beautiful colonial and Oak Ridge estates just 6 weeks after my meeting with Richard. I helped them on moving day, bringing homemade lasagna and a toolbox to assemble furniture and hang pictures. I'd expected to spend the weekend settling them in, but by Saturday afternoon, Melanie had made it clear my help was no longer needed. "My mother has arranged for a professional decorator to come on Monday," she said, taking a picture frame from my hands before I could hang it. "We should probably wait on putting holes in the walls until we have a proper design plan." Nathan avoided my eyes when I looked to him for support. "Melanie's right, Mom. Her mother knows someone who's done celebrity homes. It'll be better to let the professional handle it." I swallowed my hurt and packed up the toolbox. Of course, you want things done properly. That night, as I drove back to my modest ranch house in Pine Hollow, I couldn't help but compare the two homes. Their sprawling colonial with its gleaming hardwood floors and soaring ceilings, my cozy 3-bedroom with its worn carpet and outdated kitchen. The monthly mortgage payment I was secretly helping them make was nearly twice what I paid for my own home. A home that was almost paid off before I took out a second mortgage to fund Nathan's education, but those were choices I'd made willingly. Sacrifices that seemed worth it each time I saw Nathan's face light up with pride as he showed me another feature of the new house. "The back patio is perfect for entertaining," he'd said, already adopting Melanie's social aspirations. "We're thinking of hosting a summer barbecue for the neighbors." The housewarming party came 3 weeks later. Melanie had indeed hired a professional decorator who had transformed the space into something that wouldn't have looked out of place in an upscale design magazine. Modern art adorned the walls, custom draperies framed the windows, and furniture I doubted Nathan had selected filled the meticulously arranged rooms. I arrived early, hoping to help with preparations, but found a catering team already setting up. Melanie greeted me at the door in a designer dress, accepting the potted orchid I'd brought with a tight smile. "How thoughtful," she said, handing it off to a caterer without a second glance. "We've actually gone with a specific color scheme for the floral arrangements, but I'm sure we can find a place for this somewhere." The evening proceeded with a steady stream of Melanie's family friends and colleagues arriving, people Nathan had mentioned but I'd never met. I found myself increasingly isolated, standing awkwardly in corners. My attempts at conversation met with polite but disinterested responses from Melanie's crowd. I eventually retreated to the kitchen, where I found Nathan arranging canapes on a silver tray. "Everything looks beautiful," I said, trying to connect with my son. "You must be so happy with how it's all coming together." Nathan glanced over his shoulder before answering, as if checking whether Melanie was nearby. "It's a lot sometimes," he admitted. "The house, the entertaining, keeping up with Melanie's friends. Her world is different from how I grew up." For a moment, I glimpsed my real son beneath the polished veneer he'd adopted. But before I could respond, Melanie swept into the kitchen. "Nathan, the Prestons just arrived," she said, eyeing me with barely concealed annoyance. "They're interested in using your agency for their rebranding. You should come talk to them." As Nathan followed Melanie out, he gave me an apologetic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Duty calls. Networking, you know." I spent the rest of the evening feeling increasingly out of place in this home that my money had helped secure. The few times I managed to speak with Nathan, Melanie would appear within minutes, drawing him away with some social obligation or introduction that couldn't wait. When I left earlier than most guests, Nathan walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, giving me a quick hug. "The house looks wonderful," I said, meaning it despite everything. "I'm so happy for you both." "We couldn't have done it without Dad's old connections helping with the financing," he said, repeating the story Melanie had crafted to explain their ability to afford the home. "It's amazing how those college friendships of his paid off after all these years." The lie stung more than I expected. Thomas, who had contributed nothing to Nathan's upbringing since he was 5, was now getting credit for my sacrifice. But I said nothing, simply kissing my son's cheek and walking to my car. The weeks after the housewarming party established a new pattern in our relationship. My Sunday dinners with Nathan, a tradition since he'd moved back to the area after college, became less frequent. First, they were every other week, then monthly, then only when Melanie had other plans. "Sorry, Mom," Nathan would say when canceling at the last minute. "Melanie's parents invited us to the club for brunch," or, "We've been asked to a gallery opening by Melanie's boss." When he did come over, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly, making excuses to leave early. The easy conversations we'd once shared about books, politics, and his work had been replaced by surface-level small talk and long silences. I tried to maintain our connection by showing interest in their new life. I asked about neighborhood events, Melanie's work, their plans for the house, but increasingly my questions were met with vague answers or gentle deflections. "We're thinking of redoing the guest bathroom," I'd say, offering to help with the painting. "Oh, Melanie has specific ideas for that," Nathan would reply. "Her mother knows a contractor who specializes in luxury renovations." 3 months after they moved in, I received a call from Richard, my financial advisor. "Evelyn," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I wanted to let you know that the first quarterly property tax bill for Nathan's house has arrived. It's significantly higher than we estimated, about $3,200 for this installment." I closed my eyes, doing the mental math. Another expense I hadn't fully calculated when arranging to supplement their mortgage. "I'll transfer the funds today," I said, already mentally rearranging my budget to accommodate this new demand. "Evelyn," Richard said, hesitation clear in his voice. "Are you sure about continuing this arrangement? The financial strain on your retirement savings? They need." "This, Richard," I interrupted. "Nathan is finally establishing himself, making connections through Melanie that could advance his career. I can't pull the rug out from under him now." Richard sighed. "Just remember what we discussed about setting a time limit. This was supposed to be temporary support until Nathan's career advanced enough to take over the full payments." "It will be," I assured him, though I had no concrete evidence that Nathan's professional situation was improving. If anything, his vague answers about work suggested he might be struggling. The truth was, I was beginning to realize that Melanie had expensive tastes that extended beyond the house itself. Each time I visited, I noticed new furniture, artwork, or electronics. Nathan had mentioned renovating the kitchen, despite the house being less than 10 years old with modern appliances. The lifestyle they were building seemed to require a level of income well beyond what Nathan's marketing position provided. My concerns grew when I bumped into Nathan's friend Marcus at the grocery store. Marcus and Nathan had been close since college, but I hadn't seen him at any of the gatherings at the new house. "Mrs. D," Marcus exclaimed, giving me a warm hug. "How's retirement planning coming along? Nathan mentioned you were finally going to take that cruise you've been talking about for years." I blinked in confusion. "Retirement? I'm still working full-time at Memorial." The cruise was something I'd mentioned once, years ago, as a dream, for someday. A someday that had been indefinitely postponed by my financial commitment to Nathan's house. Marcus looked embarrassed. "Oh, I must have misunderstood. Nathan said something about you having a comfortable retirement fund and planning to travel." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Marcus's words stayed with me. What narrative was Nathan sharing with his friends about my financial situation? Did he genuinely believe I was financially secure? Or was this a story he told himself to justify accepting my help? My sister Patricia's concerns became more pointed during our weekly lunch dates. "Have you seen what Melanie posted on Instagram?" she asked one day, sliding her phone across the table to show me photos of a designer handbag with the caption, "Early anniversary gift from my amazing husband. Blessed year designer life." The handbag was easily recognizable as a luxury brand that cost thousands. Money that I knew Nathan didn't have, unless he was falling into credit card debt or dipping into savings I wasn't aware of. Nathan's an adult, I said, pushing the phone back toward Patricia. How they manage their finances is their business. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Is it? When you're still working 60-hour weeks at 63 to help pay for a house they're filling with luxury goods? Her words stung because they contained a truth I was trying to ignore. The arrangement that had started as temporary support was showing no signs of ending. If anything, Nathan and Melanie seemed to be increasing their spending rather than working toward financial independence. But the real turning point came 6 months after they moved in, when I received a call from Melanie, not Nathan, a rare occurrence that immediately put me on alert. "Evelyn," she said, her voice honey-sweet in a way that instantly made me wary. "I'm planning a surprise birthday party for Nathan next month, and I need your help with something." "Of course," I replied, happy to be included in celebrating my son's birthday. "What do you need?" Nathan mentioned that his father gave him a trust fund that he can access at 30. Something about his grandfather's arrangement? I nearly dropped the phone. There was no trust fund. Thomas's father had indeed set up small college funds for his grandchildren, but that money had been used years ago for Nathan's first year at Westlake. The remaining tuition had come from my second mortgage and endless overtime shifts. "There must be some misunderstanding," I said carefully. "Thomas's father did set up a college fund, but that money was used years ago. There's no trust fund coming at 30. Silence stretched across the line. Then, "That's strange. Nathan specifically mentioned using trust fund money for some renovations we're planning. He said it would be available next month." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Was Nathan lying to Melanie about their financial situation? Or worse, did he genuinely believe there was money coming, some imagined windfall that would solve the financial pressures they were under? "I'll talk to him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe I'm misremembering something." But I wasn't. There was no trust fund, no financial safety net beyond what I was secretly providing. Nathan was either deliberately misleading his wife or had constructed a fantasy to avoid facing financial reality. That evening, I called Nathan, determined to understand what was happening. The conversation started normally enough, with casual updates about work and plans for the weekend. Then I carefully broached the subject. "Melanie called me today about your birthday plans," I began. "She mentioned something about a trust fund from your grandfather?" Nathan was quiet for a moment too long. "Oh, that," he finally said, his voice unnaturally casual. "Yeah, Dad mentioned that Grandpa had set something aside that comes available when I turn 30. It's probably not much, but we thought it might help with some house projects." The ease with which he continued the lie stunned me. "Nathan," I said gently, "your grandfather's money was used for your first year at Westlake. There is no trust fund coming at 30. Another long pause. "Are you sure?" Dad specifically said. "When—" "Did your father tell you this?" I interrupted, a spark of anger flaring. Thomas had barely communicated with Nathan since the divorce, sending birthday cards with no personal message and occasionally liking his social media posts. We had lunch a few months ago," Nathan said, his voice growing defensive. "When he was in town for a conference, he mentioned Grandpa's arrangement." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. Thomas, always charming, always eager to appear the generous father without actually making sacrifices, spinning stories about family money that didn't exist. "Nathan, I handled all the financial arrangements after the divorce. I was the executor of your grandfather's estate. The college fund was the only money he set aside, and it was exhausted in your freshman year. Everything else, tuition, housing, expenses, came from my income and a second mortgage on the house." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear Nathan's carefully constructed financial narrative crumbling. "But then," he began, his voice small in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "How are we affording the house? Melanie thinks—" I cut him off, not ready, to reveal my role in their mortgage. "What does Melanie think, Nathan? What have you told her about your financial situation?" His answer, when it came, confirmed my worst fears. "She thinks my marketing position pays more than it does," he admitted quietly. "And that Dad has been helping with some investments, and that there's family money coming." None of it was true. The house they lived in, the lifestyle they were building, was a financial house of cards that would collapse without my continued support. Support Nathan didn't even know he was receiving. In that moment, I realized the depth of the problem. It wasn't just that Nathan and Melanie were living beyond their means. It was that they had constructed an entire fantasy about their financial reality, one that allowed them to maintain appearances without acknowledging the precariousness of their situation. And I had helped create this fantasy by silently supporting them, by being the invisible foundation beneath their house of cards. The question now was how long I could or should continue to maintain the illusion. The tension from our phone conversation lingered in the weeks that followed. Nathan became evasive, making excuses to cancel our already infrequent get-togethers. When I did see him, there was a new guardedness in his manner, as if he feared I might expose the financial fiction he'd created for Melanie. I wrestled with what to do about the mortgage payments. The responsible course would be to tell Nathan the truth, that I had been supplementing their housing costs from the beginning, that the lifestyle they were building was fundamentally unsustainable without my help. But every time I considered having that conversation, I pictured the shame on his face, the potential damage to his marriage if Melanie discovered he'd misrepresented their financial situation. So I continued the arrangement, watching my retirement savings dwindle month by month, justifying it as a temporary measure until Nathan found his footing in his career. The invitation to Nathan's 30th birthday party arrived via text from Melanie rather than a proper card. Garden party for Nathan's. 30th, Saturday the 12th, 4 p.m. Dressy casual, no gifts necessary. The last line struck me as odd. Nathan had always loved receiving gifts, and a milestone birthday seemed an unusual time to discourage them. Then again, the entire message felt perfunctory, an obligation rather than a genuine inclusion. I spent hours selecting a gift despite Melanie's instruction, a vintage watch I'd had restored, one that had belonged to my father. It held both sentimental and monetary value, something I thought Nathan could appreciate on multiple levels. I wrapped it carefully in silver paper with a handwritten card expressing how proud I was of the man he'd become. When I arrived at the party, the front yard of the Colonial was transformed with white tents, flower arrangements, and catering tables laden with food far more elaborate than I'd expected for a garden party. At least 40 people milled about, most in attire that stretched the definition of dressy casual toward formal. Women in summer cocktail dresses and designer sandals, men in blazers and expensive-looking loafers. Melanie greeted me at the entrance tent, champagne flute in hand. "Evelyn, so glad you could make it." Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she took in my simple sundress and cardigan, perfectly appropriate for a garden party but clearly not meeting the unstated dress code of this event. "Happy to celebrate Nathan," I replied, holding out the silver-wrapped package. "I know you said no gifts, but I couldn't resist." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she took the box. "How thoughtful. I'll add it to the table with the others." Others? Despite the no gifts necessary instruction, a table near the sobbing back tent held a substantial pile of wrapped presents. Clearly, the directive had been selective. I made my way through the crowd, searching for Nathan. I recognized a few of his colleagues and college friends, but most of the guests were strangers to me, Melanie's work associates, neighbors, and what appeared to be members of her parents' social circle. I finally spotted Nathan near the bar, deep in conversation with an older man in a linen suit. He looked different somehow, his hair styled in a way I hadn't seen before, wearing clothes that seemed more aligned with Melanie's taste than his own. "Nathan," I called as I approached, arms outstretched for a birthday hug. He turned, surprise, briefly flickering across his face before he composed himself. "Mom, you made it." His hug was quick, almost perfunctory. "Have you met Edward Winters, Melanie's father?" So this was Edward, the man whose connections were supposedly helping with their financing. I extended my hand, studying the imposing figure whose daughter had so thoroughly changed my son's priorities. "A pleasure to finally meet you," I said. "I've heard so much about you." Edward's handshake was firm, his assessment of me barely concealed behind a practiced smile. "Likewise, Melanie mentions you often." Somehow I doubted that, or at least doubted the nature of those mentions. "We were just discussing the market," Nathan explained, a bit too eagerly. "Edward thinks it's a good time to consider investment. Properties. Investment properties? When they could barely afford the home they were in without my secret assistance?" I kept my expression neutral. "How interesting," I replied. "That sounds like quite an undertaking." Edward nodded sagely. "Strike. While the iron is hot, that's my philosophy. I've been advising Nathan on some opportunities in the lakefront development area. With his marketing background and eye for potential, he could do quite well in real estate investment." The conversation continued in this vein, Edward pontificating about wealth-building strategies, Nathan nodding along as if he were in a position to implement any of them. I stood there, sipping my champagne, watching my son perform the role of successful young professional with investment capital at his disposal. It was a surreal experience, observing this elaborate fiction from the outside while knowing the financial reality that underpinned it. Part of me wanted to pull Nathan aside immediately, to shake some sense into him about the dangerous game he was playing. But another part, the part that had protected him from harsh realities his entire life, held. Because as the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Nathan was busy playing host alongside Melanie, circulating among guests who clearly held more social value than his mother. When the cake was brought out, an elaborate three-tiered creation that must have cost hundreds, I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as Nathan and Melanie posed for photos, their perfect smiles reflecting the carefully curated image they were projecting. After the cake, Melanie clinked her glass for attention. "Before Nathan opens his gifts, his father has prepared a special video message since he couldn't be here. Today." My heart sank as a large screen was wheeled out, and a projected image of Thomas appeared. My ex-husband, still handsome in his early 60s, smiled broadly from what appeared to be a luxury yacht. "Happy birthday, son," he boomed, raising a glass toward the camera. 30 years, I can hardly believe it. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to celebrate with you, but this Mediterranean charter waits for no man." He chuckled at his own joke, and I heard appreciative laughter from the crowd. Thomas continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. Your beautiful home, your successful career, the lovely Melanie by your side. You've created a life of substance and style." He paused dramatically. "And speaking of substance, check your email after the party. I've sent something that should help with those renovation plans Melanie's been telling me about. Consider it an investment in the next chapter of your life." The video ended with Thomas raising his glass again in a toast, the Mediterranean sunset, perfectly framed behind him. The crowd applauded, and Nathan beamed with pride, as if his long-absent father's approval was the ultimate validation. I felt physically ill. Thomas, who had contributed nothing to Nathan's upbringing, was now positioning himself as the generous benefactor, the foundation of Nathan's success. And Nathan was not only accepting this narrative, but embracing it. The gift opening began soon after. I watched as Nathan unwrapped presents far more expensive than appropriate for a 30-year-old's birthday, a designer watch from Melanie's parents, custom golf clubs from her brother, A weekend getaway package. From her colleagues. Most came with cards that were read aloud, eliciting appropriate responses from the crowd. When he reached my gift, the small silver package looking humble among the elaborate wrappings, Nathan opened it with less flourish than the others. He lifted the vintage watch from its box, a brief flicker of recognition crossing his face. "It was Grandpa's," I said, stepping forward slightly. "I had it restored. The watchmaker said it's quite valuable now. They don't make them like that anymore." Nathan nodded, a genuine smile briefly replacing his practiced one. "Thanks, Mom. It's really something." He placed it back in the box rather than putting it on, moving quickly to the next gift. There was no reading of my card, no acknowledgement of the sentiment behind the gift, just a perfunctory thanks and a move to maintain the momentum of the celebration. As the formal gift opening concluded and guests began to disperse into smaller conversation groups, I decided it was time to leave. I'd said my congratulations. I'd witnessed the performance, and staying any longer would only increase the hollow feeling in my chest. I found Nathan near the drinks table, momentarily alone as Melanie directed the catering staff on dessert service. "I'm going to head out. Sweetheart," I said, touching his arm gently. "It was a lovely party." He looked surprised. "Already? We haven't even done the final toast." "I have an early shift tomorrow," I lied, unwilling to admit that I felt utterly superfluous to this celebration of a son I barely recognized. "Well, thanks for coming," he said, giving me another of those quick, perfunctory hugs. "And for the watch. It's very nostalgic." "Your grandfather would be proud to see you wearing it," I said, hoping to connect with the Nathan I knew was still in, there somewhere. "He always said a man should have one good watch in his life, something that stands the test of time." Nathan nodded, but his attention was already drifting to a group of Melanie's friends who were calling him over. "I'll wear it to the next family dinner," he said absently, already stepping away. "Drive safely, Mom." I walked to my car alone, no one from the party noticing or caring about my early departure. As I drove home through the twilight, the contrast between the life Nathan was pretending to live and the financial reality I knew to be true weighed heavily on me. Something would have to give eventually. The question was what, and when, and at what cost to all of us. The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 days after the birthday party, I received a call from Richard, my financial advisor. His voice had an unusual edge of concern. "Evelyn, we need to talk about Nathan's mortgage arrangement," he said without preamble. "There's been a development." "What kind of development?" I asked, immediately alert. "I received a call from Westview Mortgage this morning," Richard continued, his voice tense. "Nathan and Melanie have applied for a home equity line of credit. They're trying to borrow against the house." I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what this meant. "But they've barely built any equity. We've only been making payments for 9 months, Richard finished for me. "That's precisely the problem. The mortgage officer handling their application noticed our LLC arrangement and flagged it. They're asking questions about the source of the monthly payments and who actually owns the property." I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "What did you tell them?" "Only that I'd need to consult with my client before discussing the details." "But Evelyn, this puts us in a difficult position. If Nathan and Melanie are applying for more credit without disclosing the full picture of their financial situation, there could be legal implications." Legal implications. The phrase hung in the air like a thundercloud. My arrangement with Richard's LLC had been perfectly legitimate. I was simply helping my son without his knowledge. But if Nathan was now misrepresenting his income or assets to secure additional financing, what happens now? I asked, my mouth dry. "The mortgage company has requested a meeting with all parties involved to clarify the financial structure before proceeding with the home equity application. That includes you, me, Nathan, and Melanie." The thought of Melanie discovering my role in their housing situation, of Nathan learning that his financial independence was largely illusory, made my stomach clench. There must be another way. Can't we just deny the application through the LLC? Richard sighed heavily. We could, but that would only delay the inevitable. They'd start asking why their home equity application was being blocked by a third party. Eventually, this would all come to light anyway. He was right, of course. The financial fiction I'd helped create was unraveling, and there was no way to reweave it without everyone seeing the threads. When is this meeting? I asked, resignation settling over me. Thursday at 2 p.m. I've already confirmed my attendance. You should be there, Evelyn. Better that Nathan and Melanie hear the truth from you than from strangers. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, trying to imagine how Thursday's meeting would unfold. What would I say to Nathan? How would Melanie react? Would this be the end of my relationship with my son? I thought about calling Nathan immediately, giving him some warning about what was coming. But what would I say? By the way, I've been secretly paying most of your mortgage for the past 9 months, and now your attempt to borrow more money has exposed our arrangement. Instead, I did what I'd always done when faced with difficult emotions. I went to work. The hospital had always been my refuge, the place where my identity as a competent, respected nurse overshadowed my complicated role as a mother. For 12 hours, I focused on other people's problems, administering medications, checking vital signs, offering comfort to patients and families navigating their own crises. My colleague Sarah found me in the break room around midnight, staring into a cup of cold coffee. You look like you've lost your best friend, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. What's going on, Evelyn? I considered deflecting, offering some vague reassurance that everything was fine. But the weight of tomorrow's coming confrontation pressed down on me too heavily for pretense. I made a mistake with Nathan, I admitted. A big one. Sarah listened without judgment as I explained the whole situation. The secret mortgage payments, Nathan's misrepresentations to Melanie, the impending meeting that would expose everything. Oh, Evelyn, she sighed when I finished. Your heart was in the right place, but I've enabled a situation that's about to blow up in all our faces. I finished for her. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Maybe this isn't as bad as you think. Nathan is an adult. He made his own choices about what to tell Melanie. Yes, you helped create the situation by providing financial support without transparency. But ultimately, he chose to build a lifestyle of appearances, rather than reality. Her words offered little comfort, but there was truth in them. I'd provided the means, but Nathan had constructed the fiction. We were both responsible for the coming reckoning. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I dressed carefully, in a simple blue dress and cardigan, professional but not intimidating. As I drove to Westview Mortgage's offices, I rehearsed what I might say, how I would explain my actions without embarrassing Nathan or fueling Melanie's likely anger. Richard was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, his usual confident demeanor, somewhat subdued. Are you ready for this? He asked quietly. No, I admitted, but it needs to be done. The mortgage officer, a woman named Jennifer Landry, greeted us professionally, leading us to a conference room with a view of the city skyline. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes haven't arrived yet, she explained, checking her watch. We should get started as soon as they're here. I have quite a few questions about the financial structure of their mortgage. We sat in uncomfortable silence for about 10 minutes before the door opened. Nathan entered first, his expression a mixture of confusion and wariness. Melanie followed, impeccably dressed as always, her face a mask of professional politeness that slipped momentarily when she saw me. Mom? Nathan's voice held genuine surprise. What are you doing here? Before I could answer, Jennifer stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, thank you for coming. I believe you know Ms. Donovan and Mr. Blackwood? They're here because they're directly involved in your mortgage arrangement. Nathan's brow furrowed. There must be some mistake. My mother isn't on our mortgage. Not directly, Jennifer explained, opening a folder on the conference table. But according to our records, a significant portion of your monthly payment comes from an LLC managed by Mr. Blackwood, and the primary funder of that LLC is Ms. Donovan. I watched the information register on Nathan's face, confusion, then shock, then something that looked like embarrassment mixed with anger. Melanie's reaction was more controlled, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the implications. Perhaps, Richard suggested, breaking the tense silence, Ms. Donovan should explain the arrangement. All eyes turned to me. The speech I'd rehearsed in the car evaporated from my mind, leaving only the raw truth. When you were looking at houses in Oak Ridge Estates, I began, looking directly at Nathan, I knew the payments would be more than you could manage on your salary. I wanted you to have the home you wanted, to build the life you dreamed of. So I set up an arrangement with Richard. My contributions cover about 70% of your monthly mortgage payment. Nathan's face paled. 70%? Yes, I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. The house cost considerably more than you could afford on your marketing salary. I thought I was helping. Melanie's voice cut through the room, sharp as a blade. So you've been lying to us? Manipulating our lives from behind the scenes? No, I said quickly. I wasn't manipulating anything. I was just trying to help Nathan, to help both of you, achieve what you wanted. Without telling us, she pressed. Without being honest about what we could actually afford. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Nathan remained silent, staring at the table as if trying to make sense of a puzzle with too many pieces. Jennifer cleared her throat. This actually brings us to the purpose of today's meeting. Your application for a home equity line of credit has raised some concerns, given the unusual payment structure of your mortgage. Before we can proceed, we need full transparency about your financial situation. Our financial situation? Melanie repeated, her voice rising slightly. Apparently, our financial situation is that my mother-in-law has been secretly paying our bills like we're children. Is that transparent enough for you? Nathan finally looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and betrayal. Why, Mom? Why didn't you just tell me the truth? That we couldn't afford this house, this neighborhood? The question hit me like a physical blow. Would you have listened? You were so determined to live in Oak Ridge, to give Melanie the lifestyle she expected. I was afraid you'd resent me if I stood in the way of that. So instead, you created this. This fantasy, he said, gesturing around him as if the conference room itself represented the illusion he'd been living in. Let me believe I was successfully providing for my family, when in reality, I was still depending on you. That wasn't my intention, I insisted, feeling the situation slipping further from any hope of understanding. I just wanted you to be happy. Melanie laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Happy living a lie? Or did you enjoy watching us struggle to keep up appearances while holding the financial strings? That's not fair, Richard interjected, his professional demeanor giving way to defensiveness on my behalf. Ms. Donovan has made significant sacrifices to maintain this arrangement. Her retirement savings. Richard, I cut him off, not wanting Nathan to know the full extent of my financial compromises. But it was too late. Your retirement savings? Nathan's voice had grown quieter, more horrified. You've been using your retirement money to pay our mortgage? The shame on his face was exactly what I'd feared all along, the reason I'd kept the arrangement secret in the first place. It's not as bad as it sounds, I lied, unable to bear his distress. I've been managing just fine. Jennifer cleared her throat again, clearly uncomfortable with the personal drama unfolding in her conference room. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate issue, Given what we now understand about the financial structure of the mortgage, I'm afraid we cannot approve the home equity line of credit at this time. The debt-to-income ratio, when properly calculated using only Mr. Hughes' actual income, exceeds our lending parameters. So not only have we been living in a house we can't afford, Melanie said, her voice tight with anger, but now we can't access the equity we thought we had for the kitchen renovation. Perfect. Nathan hadn't taken his eyes off me. How much? He asked quietly. How much have you been paying each month? I hesitated, but Richard answered for me. Approximately $2,150 per month, plus property tax installments. The number hung in the air between us. Nearly $3,000 every month from my limited resources, diverted to maintain a lifestyle that Nathan and Melanie hadn't earned. I had no idea, Nathan whispered. And for a moment, he looked like my son again. The compassionate boy who had once offered his allowance to help a classmate who couldn't afford a field trip. Then his expression hardened, and he stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Nathan, I began, reaching for his arm, but he pulled away. Not now, Mom. I can't process this right now. Melanie was already gathering her purse and phone, her movements sharp with anger. Thank you for your time, Ms. Landry, she said with cold professionalism. We'll need to reconsider our options. They left without another word to me, the conference, room door closing behind them with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. Jennifer shuffled papers uncomfortably. I'm sorry that was difficult, she said, not meeting my eyes. Unfortunately, situations like this, where the true financial picture differs from what the borrowers believed, are not uncommon. Richard and I left shortly after, standing in awkward silence beside our cars in the parking lot. That could have gone better, he finally said, an understatement so profound it almost made me laugh despite everything. What happens now? I asked. He sighed. Legally, nothing has changed. Your arrangement through the LLC can continue if you want it to. The question is whether you should, now that everything is out in the open. The question hung between us, unanswerable in that moment. Everything had changed, yet nothing was resolved. He'll come around? Richard offered, trying to sound reassuring. Once the shock wears off, he'll understand you were trying to help. I wasn't so sure. The look in Nathan's eyes, betrayal mingled with shame, suggested a wound that wouldn't heal easily. And Melanie's anger would likely only intensify as she processed the implications for her carefully constructed social image. As I drove home, alone, I realized that in trying to protect Nathan from financial reality, I'd actually stolen something precious from him, the opportunity to build a life within his actual means, to experience the genuine pride that comes from authentic achievement. My help, offered with the best intentions, had become a foundation of sand beneath the house they thought was solid. The question now was whether that foundation would wash away completely, taking my relationship with my son with it. The week following, the mortgage meeting passed in a haze of unanswered calls and texts. I reached out to Nathan daily, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as days went by without response. Please call me back, sweetheart. We need to talk about this. Nathan, I understand you're upset, but please don't shut me out. I'm worried about you. Just let me know you're okay. On the 8th day of silence, I drove to Oak Ridge Estates, determined to speak with my son face to face. The October afternoon was crisp, leaves skittering across immaculate lawns as I navigated through the winding streets toward the colonial house that had become the center of our family crisis. I parked across the street, gathering my courage before approaching the front door. The house looked different somehow, not in any physical way, but in what it represented. No longer the symbol of my son's achievement, but a monument to our mutual deception. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the stone path and rang the doorbell. No answer. I waited, then rang again, knowing they were home. Both their cars were in the driveway. After the third ring, I heard movement inside, and the door opened to reveal Melanie, her expression cold. "Evelyn?" she said, making no move, "to invite me in." "This isn't a good time." "I need to see Nathan," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "He hasn't returned my calls all week." "He doesn't want to talk to you right now," she said, blocking the doorway with her body. "Surely you can understand why." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the living room, now in disarray. Boxes were stacked against the wall, some of the decorative items missing from their usual places. "What's going on?" I asked, a new anxiety taking root. "Are you moving?" Something flickered across Melanie's face. Satisfaction, perhaps, at being the one to deliver this news. "We're downsizing to something more appropriate for our actual budget, now that we understand our true financial situation." Her emphasis on true and actual felt like a deliberate jab, but I ignored it, focusing on the implications of her words. "You're selling the house? We don't have much choice, do we? Not after your little arrangement was exposed." She leaned against the doorframe, studying me. "Did you enjoy it, Evelyn? Watching us strain to keep up with the neighbors while you held the purse strings? Was it some kind of power trip for you?" The accusation stung precisely because it was so far from the truth. "Of course not. I was just trying to help." "Help?" She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You undermined my husband's confidence. You made him feel like a failure when he found out the truth. How exactly is that helping?" I struggled to find words that might bridge the chasm between us. "I never meant to hurt either of you. I thought I was supporting Nathan's dreams, giving him a chance to build the life he wanted with you." "The life I wanted?" Melanie's voice rose slightly. "So this is my fault now? I'm the gold digger who pushed him beyond his means?" "That's not what I said," I protested, though the thought had crossed my mind more than once in recent months. "It's what you implied. It's what you've always implied with your little comments about our lovely lifestyle and how different things are from how Nathan grew up." Her eyes narrowed. "You've never approved of me, have you? Never thought I was good enough for your precious son, despite my family's connections." I took a deep breath, trying to diffuse the escalating tension. "Melanie, please. I just want to talk to Nathan. I need to explain." "He doesn't want your explanations," she cut me off, "or your money. We're figuring this out on our own, which is what we should have been doing from the beginning." From somewhere inside the house, I heard Nathan's voice. "Who is it, Mel?" My heart leapt at the sound. "Nathan, it's Mom. Please, can we talk?" Melanie didn't move from the doorway, but called over her shoulder. "It's your mother. Should I tell her to leave?" A pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. Then, "Tell her I'll call her next week. I can't do this right now." The dismissal hit like a physical blow. My son was just rooms away but unwilling to even see me. "Nathan, please," I called, my voice breaking. "Just 5 minutes." Melanie turned back to me, a hint of pity now mingling with the contempt in her expression. "You heard him. He'll call you when he's ready. Now isn't the time to push." Part of me wanted to insist, to force my way past her and confront my son directly. But what would that accomplish beyond deepening the rift between us? I'd spent decades respecting Nathan's feelings, his needs. Even now, I couldn't bring myself to violate his wishes, no matter how much it hurt. "Tell him." I paused, swallowing hard against the tightness in my throat. "Tell him I love him. And I'm sorry." Melanie nodded curtly, already closing the door. "I'll pass that along." I stood on the porch for a moment after the door clicked shut, listening to the muffled sounds of conversation inside. Melanie's voice animated, Nathan's responses too low to make out. Then I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. As I drove home, The full implications of what Melanie had said began to sink in. They were selling the house. The home I'd secretly financed, the center of Nathan's aspirational lifestyle, would soon belong to someone else. And with it would go the last tangible connection I had to my son's daily life. More concerning was, what would come next? If they truly were downsizing to something more appropriate, what would that look like? Would they find a place they could actually afford on Nathan's salary? Or would they turn to Melanie's parents, exchanging my invisible support for a more overt dependence on her family's resources? The thought of Nathan becoming financially beholden to the Winters family, with their condescension and social climbing, made my stomach clench. But wasn't that precisely what he'd been with me? Dependent, just unaware of the strings attached to his lifestyle? By the time I reached home, emotional exhaustion had set in. I moved through my evening routine mechanically, feeding, my elderly cat Jasper heating a frozen dinner, checking mail. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence more profound. I found myself standing in Nathan's old bedroom, now nominally a guest room, but still filled with remnants of his childhood. Trophies from high school baseball, framed photos of father-son fishing trips from the brief period when Thomas had attempted to play the role of weekend dad, books from his college literature classes that he'd never reclaimed. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I picked up a framed photo from the nightstand. Nathan at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and possibility. Where had that connection gone? When had it become so fragile that it could shatter under the weight of financial revelations? A text message alert broke my reverie. My heart leapt, hoping it might be Nathan, but it was Sarah from the hospital. Checking on you. How are things with N? I typed back a brief summary of the day's rejection, ending with, I think I've lost him. Her response came quickly. Give him time. This is a big adjustment for his pride. But have you considered that maybe this needed to happen? That the arrangement wasn't healthy for either of you? I stared at the message, a flicker of defensive anger rising. Of course, the arrangement wasn't ideal. I'd never claimed it was. But what was the alternative? Watching Nathan and Melanie struggle? Seeing them settle for less than the life they wanted? But as quickly as the defensiveness came, it faded, replaced by the uncomfortable recognition that Sarah might be right. The secret mortgage payments had created an illusion that served none of us well. Not Nathan, living beyond his means without developing financial responsibility. Not Melanie, building social aspirations on a foundation of sand. And certainly not me, depleting my future security to maintain my son's fictional present. The next morning, I called Richard to discuss the financial implications of Nathan and Melanie selling the house. They can't just sell without addressing the LLC's interest, he explained. We'd need to either be paid out from the proceeds or agree to terminate the arrangement. And if they can't afford to pay us out? I asked, already knowing they couldn't. The house had barely appreciated in the 9 months they'd owned it. Richard sighed. Then it gets complicated. Legally, the LLC has a claim on a portion of that property equivalent to the payments made. But enforcing that claim against your son is not something I would ever do, I finished for him. So what are my options? You could forgive the debt, essentially convert the payments from a loan to a gift. It would be a significant financial loss for you, but it would free them to sell without complications. A gift. Nearly $30,000 over 9 months, gone with nothing to show for it, but a damaged relationship with my son. Or, Richard continued, perhaps sensing my hesitation, you could use this as an opportunity to reset the relationship on more honest terms. Sit down together, acknowledge the mistakes on both sides, and work out a reasonable repayment plan based on what Nathan can actually afford. This option appealed to the practical nurse in me, the part that believed in addressing problems directly rather than enabling unhealthy patterns. But it would require Nathan's willingness to engage, to see me as something other than the mother, who had undermined his independence. "He's not speaking to me right now," I admitted. "Melanie wouldn't even let me see him yesterday." "Give it time," Richard advised, echoing Sarah's words. "This is a significant blow to his self-image. Men especially struggle with financial dependence. It strikes at the core of how we're taught to define success." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea, contemplating my next move. The practical course would be to wait, to give Nathan space to process his feelings and come to terms with the situation. But something in me rebelled against passivity, against allowing Melanie's narrative, that I had somehow orchestrated all this for my own power or satisfaction. To solidify in my son's mind, I needed to reach him directly, to explain my motivations in a way he might understand. If he wouldn't take my calls or see me in person, perhaps he would read my words. I spent the afternoon composing a letter, writing and rewriting until the kitchen table was littered with discarded drafts. How do you explain 25 years of maternal sacrifice without sounding martyred? How do you acknowledge enabling unhealthy patterns without shifting blame? The final version filled 3 pages of stationery. I began with an unequivocal apology for the secrecy, acknowledging that my actions, however well-intentioned, had undermined his autonomy. I explained the thought process that had led me to set up the mortgage arrangement, my desire to help him achieve his dreams, my fear of disappointing him if I said no, my own complex need to remain essential in his life. I detailed the financial sacrifices involved, but was careful to frame them not as a debt he owed me, but as choices I had made. Freely, I acknowledged that the arrangement couldn't continue, not because I was punishing him for his reaction, but because it wasn't healthy for any of us. Finally, I expressed my hope that we could find a way forward, not as mother and dependent child, but as adults who could support each other appropriately while respecting boundaries and truth. "I will always be your mother, and I will always love you," I concluded. But perhaps it's time we both learned what that means without financial entanglement clouding the picture. I drove to Oak Ridge Estates again the next day, planning to leave the letter in their mailbox rather than risk another confrontation with Melanie. But as I approached the house, I noticed a for sale sign already planted in the front yard. The words, "Price Reduced, Motivated Sellers," emblazoned across the top. The sight stopped me in my tracks. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated, practically giving the house away based on that tagline. Where were they going? What were their plans? The questions multiplied, along with a growing sense of being shut out of my son's life entirely. As I stood contemplating the sign, the front door opened, and Nathan emerged carrying a box to his car. He spotted me immediately, freezing in place as our eyes met across the lawn. For a long moment, neither of us moved or spoke. Then, setting the box down on the hood of his car, he walked toward me with slow, measured steps. Up close, I could see the toll the past week had taken on him. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed with fatigue, shoulders slumped beneath his casual shirt. "Mom," he said simply, his voice neither warm nor cold, just tired. "I wrote you a letter," I said, holding out the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. "I know you don't want to talk, but please just read it." He took the envelope, turning it over in his hands without opening it. "We're selling the house," he said unnecessarily, gesturing toward the sign. "I can see that. Is it what you want?" A hint of the anger I'd been expecting flickered across his face. What I want? I wanted the life I thought I had built. A successful career, a beautiful home, a future that made sense. But apparently, that was all fiction. The bitterness in his voice cut deep, but I forced myself to stand firm. "Not all of it, Nathan. Your job is real. Your marriage is real. Your capabilities are real. The only fiction was the financial foundation, and that's something we can address together if you'll let me." He laughed, a hollow sound without humor. "Address it how? You've done enough, don't you think?" We're addressing it by selling this place and finding something we can actually afford." "And where will that be?" I asked, trying to keep any hint of judgment from my voice. "We've found an apartment in Riverside Heights," he said, naming a modest complex about 20 minutes from Oak Ridge. "It's nothing special, but it's what we can manage on my salary." I nodded, relief mingling with concern. Riverside Heights wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and, most importantly, within his actual budget. But the step down from Oak Ridge Estates would be significant, especially for Melanie. "How is Melanie handling all this?" I asked carefully. Something complicated passed across Nathan's face. Frustration, defensiveness, perhaps a hint of his own doubts. "She's adjusting. It's been hard on both of us." I wanted to ask more, about their relationship, about how this financial revelation had affected their marriage, but I sensed he wasn't ready for that level of disclosure. Instead, I gestured toward the letter he still held. "Please read it. When you're ready." I've tried to explain everything, why I did, what I was thinking. It doesn't excuse the secrecy, but maybe it will help you understand. He nodded, tucking the envelope into his back pocket. "I should get back to packing. We're trying to be out by next weekend." "So soon?" "The buyers want immediate occupancy, and we need to close quickly to avoid—" He trailed off. But I could fill in the blank. "To avoid missing mortgage payments now that my support had ended. To avoid the financial consequences of my decision to stop enabling their unsustainable lifestyle." "I understand," I said, though every part of me wanted to offer help, with the move, with the transition, with whatever financial shortfall they were facing. But those old patterns were precisely what had led us to this impasse. "Just know that I'm here when you're ready to talk." He didn't respond directly, just gave a slight nod before turning back toward his car and the waiting box. I watched him for a moment, this man who was my son, yet somehow a stranger to me now, and wondered how long it would take to rebuild what had been broken, if it could be rebuilt at all. As I walked back to my car, a strange sense of both loss and liberation washed over me. The secret that had weighed on me for months was finally in the open. The financial burden I'd carried was lifting, even as a different kind of weight. The uncertainty of my future relationship with Nathan settled in its place. For the first time in decades, I was not directly responsible for maintaining my son's lifestyle or solving his problems. The loss of that role left an emptiness, a question about my own identity that I wasn't yet sure how to answer. Who was Evelyn Donovan without the constant sacrifice for Nathan? What would my life look like if I redirected the energy, time, and resources I'd been channeling toward him back toward myself? These questions followed me home, lingering as I moved through my evening routine. They weren't questions I had ever expected to face at 63, when most of my peers were settling into established patterns with their adult children. Holiday visits, occasional babysitting for grandchildren, the comfortable rhythm of family, ties maintained across appropriate boundaries. But perhaps it wasn't too late to find those boundaries, to establish a healthier relationship with Nathan based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Perhaps, in the painful process of separation we were now enduring, we might both find our way to something more authentic than what we had lost. I could only hope that the foundation of love built over 25 years would prove stronger than the resentment of recent revelations. That somewhere beneath the hurt and confusion, Nathan would remember that every action I had taken, however misguided, had been born of that love. 6 months had passed since the day I watched my son carry boxes to his car, the for sale sign stark against the manicured lawn of the home my money had helped purchase. 6 months of cautious text messages, brief phone calls that skimmed the surface of our new reality, and the slow, painful process of redefining our relationship. The April rain tapped gently against my kitchen window as I prepared for Nathan's visit, his first to my home since the revelation that had shattered our old patterns. I moved with nervous energy, rearranging the fruit in the bowl, straightening magazines that were already aligned, checking the clock every few minutes, though I knew he wouldn't arrive for another hour. When my phone chimed with a text, I nearly dropped it in my haste to check the message, worried it might be Nathan canceling. Instead, it was from Patricia, my ever-practical sister. Remember to breathe. This is progress. Progress. Such a simple word for the complicated journey. We'd been navigating. The first month after they moved to Riverside Heights had been marked by silence. Nathan processing his anger, me respecting his need for space while battling my own instinct to rush in and fix things. When he finally called on Thanksgiving, declining my invitation but willing to talk for 15 minutes, it felt like a monumental breakthrough. Christmas had been harder. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't spend the holiday with my son. Melanie's parents had invited them to their winter home in Vermont, and Nathan had accepted, perhaps eager for the distraction of snow sports and festive gatherings where our financial drama wasn't the undercurrent of every conversation. I'd spent the day with Patricia and her family, trying to focus on her grandchildren's excitement rather than the absence that felt like a physical ache. When Nathan called that evening, his voice slightly slurred from holiday wine, his Merry Christmas Mom had brought tears I'd quickly blinked away. January brought tentative steps toward reconnection. Coffee at a neutral cafe where we spoke, mostly about his work, carefully avoiding the financial elephant that still loomed between us. February saw another coffee, slightly more relaxed, with Nathan mentioning in passing that he and Melanie were adjusting to the apartment lifestyle. March brought lunch at a casual restaurant where, for the first time, he asked about me, how I was spending my time, whether I was still picking up extra shifts at the hospital. And now, April, with Nathan agreeing to come to my home, to sit, at the kitchen table where I'd written that letter 6 months ago, explaining my misguided attempts to help him achieve the life he thought he wanted. The doorbell rang 15 minutes early, catching me mid-arrangement of the simple sandwich. Platter I'd prepared. Taking a deep breath, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to greet my son. Nathan stood on the porch, his hands in the pockets of a jacket I didn't recognize. Something casual and slightly worn, a far cry from the designer clothes he'd favored during the Oak Ridge Estates days. His hair was different too, shorter and less meticulously styled. But it was his expression that struck me most, a cautious openness that held neither the defensive anger of our last encounters nor the artificial cheerfulness of our recent cafe meetings. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping forward to offer a brief hug that I returned carefully, afraid of holding on too long and shattering this fragile new normalcy. "You're early," I said, immediately regretting such a mundane observation when there was so much unspoken between us. Traffic was lighter than I expected. He followed me into the kitchen, glancing around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The house looks the same." "Some things don't change," I replied, gesturing toward the table with its waiting plates and glasses. "Are you hungry? I made sandwiches." He nodded, taking the same seat he'd always chosen during family meals, a habit so ingrained I doubted he even realized it. I placed the platter between us, poured iced tea from a pitcher, and sat across from him, trying to ignore the rapid beating of my heart. For a few minutes, we ate in silence that teetered between comfortable and awkward. I resisted the urge to fill it with questions or observations, allowing Nathan the space to begin wherever he felt ready. "I got a promotion," he said finally, setting down his sandwich. "Senior marketing manager. It came through last week." "That's wonderful," I said, genuine pride warming my voice. "You've worked hard for that." "The salary increase helps," he continued, his gaze steady on mine. "We've been tight since the move, but this should make things more comfortable. Not Oak Ridge comfortable, but real comfortable," I suggested, and was rewarded with a small smile. "Yeah, real comfortable." He took a sip of his tea. "Melanie's been looking for work, too. Her pharmaceutical sales position was eliminated in a corporate restructuring, but she has an interview next week with a medical device company. This surprised me. Melanie had always spoken of her career as a choice rather than a necessity, emphasizing the networking opportunities it provided over the actual income. That she was actively job hunting suggested a shift in their financial outlook that went beyond the change in housing. That sounds promising, I said carefully. How is she doing with all the adjustments? Nathan considered the question, and I could see him weighing how much to share. It's been challenging for her, he admitted finally. The apartment is less than half the size of the house. She had to give up a lot of the furniture and decor she'd chosen. And some of her friends from Oak Ridge haven't been as interested in maintaining connections now that we're not hosting dinner parties in the neighborhood. I nodded, unsurprised but saddened by the revelation that Melanie's social circle had been as conditional as I'd suspected. And the two of you? How are you managing together through all this? A shadow crossed his face, quickly replaced by a determined expression I recognized from his childhood. The look he wore when facing a difficult situation he was determined to navigate. We're working on it. The financial stress has been clarifying in some ways. We've had to have conversations we probably should have had before getting married. About money, I said, not quite a question. About money, expectations, priorities. He met my eyes directly. About honesty and what it means to build a life together based on reality instead of appearances. The pointed reference to honesty wasn't lost on me, but I accepted it without defensiveness. Those are difficult but important conversations. They are. He paused, fidgeting with his napkin in a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage self that my heart constricted. I've been thinking a lot about what you wrote in your letter, about why you did what you did with the house. I held my breath, waiting. I was angry for a long time, he continued. Not just because you were secretly paying our mortgage, but because finding that out forced me to confront how much of my life was built on fiction. The fiction that I was successfully providing the lifestyle Melanie wanted. The fiction that I'd somehow made it in a way that justified all those designer clothes and renovation plans. He shook his head. But the more distance I get, the more I realize that I was the one who created most of those fictions. You just made them financially possible. We both made mistakes, I said softly. I should have been honest from the beginning about what I could and couldn't do to help. Instead, I enabled a situation that wasn't sustainable for any of us. Why did you do it, Mom? The question was direct but not accusatory, genuinely seeking understanding. Why not just tell me that the house was beyond our means? That we needed to look at something more realistic? I considered my answer carefully, wanting to offer honesty without excuses. I think I was afraid of disappointing you, of being the obstacle between you and the life you seem to want so badly. And maybe I was afraid of not being needed anymore. Nathan's expression softened, a glimmer of understanding replacing the confusion that had lingered in his eyes for months. Not being needed? Mom, I've relied on you my entire life. But increasingly less as you grew up, as it should be, I explained, trying to articulate feelings I'd never fully acknowledged even to myself. When you met Melanie, when you started building this new life with her family's influence, I felt myself becoming peripheral, like I was losing my place in your life. So the money was a way to stay connected? There was no judgment in his voice, just a thoughtful attempt to understand. Not consciously, I said, though his insight made me pause. But looking back, maybe part of me thought that if I could help provide the lifestyle Melanie wanted, you'd still need me, that I'd still have an important role to play. I shook my head, embarrassed by the revelation. It sounds so manipulative when I say it out loud. Not manipulative, Nathan countered. Human. We all want to feel needed by the people we love. He took another sip of his tea, his gaze drifting toward the window where rain continued to tap. A gentle rhythm. I owe you an apology too, you know. For what? For taking you for granted. For accepting help without question, without ever really considering what it cost you. His voice grew quieter. For allowing Melanie to treat you with less respect than you deserved, because it was easier than confronting the situation. The acknowledgement, so unexpected, brought a lump to my throat. You were building a new life. It's natural to prioritize your marriage. There's prioritizing a marriage, and then there's allowing your wife to push your mother to the periphery of your life, he countered. I should have stood up for you more. Should have insisted on maintaining our Sunday dinners, our traditions. He hesitated. Should have questioned where the money was coming from instead of just accepting the story that fit what I wanted to believe. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of mutual recognition settling between us. Not quite forgiveness yet, but understanding. The necessary foundation for rebuilding what had been damaged. How are you doing financially now? Nathan asked, changing the subject slightly. Since you stopped the mortgage payments? The question would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Too direct, too acknowledging of the financial entanglement we'd both participated in. That he could ask it now felt like progress of a different kind. I'm doing better, I admitted. The extra money has allowed me to cut back on some of my weekend shifts. I'm starting to rebuild my retirement savings. I paused, deciding to be fully transparent. Richard has been helping me create a more realistic financial plan, one that doesn't involve subsidizing anyone else's lifestyle. Nathan winced slightly at the phrasing, but nodded. Good. That's really good, Mom. You deserve to be focused on your own needs for a change. It feels strange, I confessed. After so many years of putting you first, prioritizing myself, takes some getting used to. What are you doing with the extra time? Now that you're working less? I felt a smile tugging at my lips. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the community garden, and I hesitated, oddly shy about sharing this particular development. I've been seeing someone. Nothing serious, just coffee and conversation, but it's been nice. Nathan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. You're dating? Mom, that's... Wow. Who is... He? His name is Daniel. He's a retired history professor who volunteers at the hospital library. We started talking about books and found we have a lot in common. I felt a flush warming my cheeks, like a teenager discussing a first crush. Like I said, it's very casual, but it's been refreshing to connect with someone new. The expression on Nathan's face shifted from surprise to something more complex, a mix of happiness and perhaps a touch of discomfort at this evidence that his mother had a life entirely separate from her identity as his parent. I'm happy for you, he said finally, and I could tell he meant it despite whatever adjustments the news required. You deserve that kind of connection. Thank you. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. It's been a season of change for both of us, hasn't it? He nodded, looking thoughtful. Melanie and I have been talking about changes too, beyond the move and her job hunting. What kind of changes? Nathan hesitated, as if debating how much to share. We've been discussing whether this is the right time to start a family. With the financial situation more stable but still modest, with both of us potentially working, it's complicated. The mention of potential grandchildren sent a ripple of emotion through me. Joy at the possibility, concern about the timing, uncertainty about what role I would play in a grandchild's life given the current state of our relationship. That is a significant decision, I said carefully. Do you feel ready for that step? I think so, he replied, surprising me with his certainty. The past 6 months have forced me to grow up in ways I probably should have years ago. To take real responsibility for my choices instead of just playing the part of a responsible adult. He gave a rueful smile. Nothing like financial reality to accelerate maturity. And Melanie? How does she feel about potentially raising children in Riverside Heights rather than Oak Ridge Estates? It was a delicate question, bordering on the criticism of Melanie I'd been careful to avoid throughout our conversation, but Nathan didn't seem offended. That's been part of our ongoing discussion, he admitted. Melanie grew up with certain expectations about lifestyle, neighborhood, schools. Adjusting those expectations has been challenging for her. He paused. But she's been doing the work, seeing a therapist actually, to help process some of her feelings about status and appearances. It's been illuminating for both of us. This revelation stunned me more than anything else he'd shared. That Melanie, polished, controlled Melanie, who had always seemed so certain of her place in the social hierarchy, was willingly examining her attitudes about status, and money indicated a depth I hadn't given her credit for. That takes courage, I said, meaning it. Self-examination isn't easy for anyone. No, it's not. Nathan finished his sandwich, pushing his plate aside. Which brings me to something I wanted to ask you. My heart beat a little faster at his serious tone. What is it? Melanie and I would like to have dinner with you next week, at our apartment. He watched my reaction closely. She suggested it, actually. Said it's time we started rebuilding family connections on more honest terms. The invitation, particularly coming from Melanie, left me momentarily speechless. After months of cautious, neutral meetings with just Nathan, the prospect of entering their home, their real home, the one they could actually afford, felt like crossing a threshold I hadn't been sure we would reach. I'd like that very much, I said when I found my voice. Are you sure Melanie is comfortable with this? She's nervous, Nathan admitted, but committed to trying. We both are. He looked at me directly, his expression earnest. The house in Oak Ridge was built on fiction, Mom. Maybe we can build something real in Riverside Heights. Something that lasts because it's founded on truth rather than appearances. I nodded, emotion tightening my throat. I'd like to be part of that. You will be, he assured me. On healthier terms this time. For all of us. As Nathan prepared to leave an hour later, our conversation having meandered through safer topics of work, books, and local news, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. Not because everything was resolved. We had barely scratched the surface of the complicated emotions and patterns that had led to our estrangement, but because we had begun the process of honest communication that might eventually lead to healing. Standing. On the porch as he walked to his car, a modest sedan that had replaced the luxury vehicle of his Oak Ridge days, I called after him, "Nathan?" He turned, raising an eyebrow in question. "I'm proud of you," I said simply. Not for the promotion or the apartment or any external markers of success, but for doing the hard work of facing reality and building something authentic. A smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes in a way I hadn't seen since before the mortgage revelation. "Thanks, Mom. I'm getting there." As I watched him drive away, I thought about the invitation to dinner at their apartment, the home they had created. Within their actual means, it wouldn't have the soaring ceilings or gourmet kitchen of the Colonial and Oak Ridge Estates. The furniture would be a mix of modest new pieces and items they'd managed to keep from the house. There would be no catering staff, no expensive wine, no carefully curated guest list of social connections. But there would be truth. And perhaps, in time, there might also be trust, forgiveness, and a new kind of family bond. One built not on financial dependence or secret support, but on mutual respect and honest affection. For now, that possibility was enough. The rest, we would build together, one honest conversation at a time. The Riverside Heights apartment complex hadn't impressed me when Nathan first mentioned it. a collection of three-story brick buildings from the 1980s, neither particularly attractive, nor notably unappealing. But as I parked my car on the visitor side of the lot, I noticed details I'd missed in my previous drive-by assessment. Well-maintained flower beds bursting with spring tulips, freshly painted trim around the windows, a playground where children laughed while parents chatted on nearby benches. It was a community, modest but alive, not just a step down from Oak Ridge Estates. I checked the address Nathan had texted. Building C, apartment 214, second floor. I smoothed my dress, a simple navy shift that I'd chosen carefully to be neither too formal nor too casual for this significant dinner, and picked up the small potted orchid I'd brought as a hostess gift. The irony of bringing Melanie another orchid after her dismissal of the last one at their housewarming party wasn't lost on me. But this felt like a chance to rewrite that interaction, to begin again on different terms. The building's entry was clean and well lit, with mailboxes lining one wall and a bulletin board advertising community events on the other. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I tried to calm my racing heart. This dinner represented more than just a meal. It was Melanie extending an olive branch, Nathan inviting me back into their lives, all of us attempting to craft a new relationship from the ashes of the old. I found 214 easily, took a deep breath, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Nathan in jeans and a button-down shirt, looking relaxed if slightly nervous. "Mom, you made it," he said, as if there had been some doubt. He gave me a quick hug before stepping back to let me enter. "I brought this," I said, offering the orchid, "for your new home." "It's beautiful," he replied, taking it from me. "Melanie will love it. She's just finishing up in the kitchen. Come in. Let me show you around." The apartment was smaller than I'd envisioned, a combined living and dining area, a galley kitchen visible through a pass-through counter, a short hallway that presumably led to bedrooms and bath. But what struck me most was how homey it felt. The furniture, a mix of pieces I recognized from the Oak Ridge house and newer, more modest items, was arranged to maximize the space. Colorful throw pillows brightened a neutral sofa, and framed photographs covered one wall in an artful collage. "You've made it very cozy," I said, genuinely impressed by how they'd transformed what could have been a generic apartment into a true home. "Melanie has a good eye," Nathan replied with evident pride. "She's been amazing at figuring out how to make the space work for us." As if summoned by her name, Melanie appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked different from when I'd last seen her, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a casual blouse rather than her usual designer attire. But it was her expression that marked the most significant change, cautious but not cold, nervous but making an effort. "Evelyn," she said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, matching her careful tone. "Your home looks lovely." A flicker of surprise crossed her face at the sincere compliment. "We've done our best with it." She noticed the orchid in Nathan's hands. "Is that for us? It's beautiful." "I thought it might brighten your space," I said, watching as she took the plant from Nathan, examining its delicate blooms with genuine appreciation rather than the dismissive glance she'd given my previous gift. "It's perfect for the dining table," she decided, placing it at the center of the small table already set for 3. "Dinner's almost ready. Nathan, why don't you offer your mother something to drink?" The careful politeness between us felt fragile, like thin ice that might crack under too much pressure. But it was a starting point, miles beyond the cold rejection at the Oak Ridge house 6 months earlier. Nathan poured glasses of wine, and we settled into an initially awkward conversation about neutral topics. The unseasonably warm spring, a local festival taking place the following weekend, the new coffee shop that had opened near the hospital where I worked. Gradually, the stiffness began to dissolve, helped along by the simple routine of sharing a meal in an intimate space. The dinner Melanie had prepared surprised me. a straightforward but delicious pasta with homemade sauce and fresh salad, completed by a loaf of bread she'd baked herself. Nothing like the elaborate catered affairs they'd hosted in Oak Ridge. "This is wonderful," I said after the first few bites. "I didn't know you baked, Melanie." She gave a small smile, the first genuine one I'd seen directed at me in years. "I didn't either until recently. Turns out I enjoy it. There's something satisfying about creating something with your own hands." Nathan reached over and squeezed her hand affectionately. "She's become quite the home chef, much better than the takeout we lived on in Oak Ridge when we weren't entertaining." The casual mention of their previous lifestyle, without defensiveness or accusation, felt like progress. We continued eating, the conversation flowing more naturally as the meal progressed. "How are things at the hospital?" Melanie asked, surprising me with her interest in my work, a topic she'd rarely engaged with before. "Busy, as always," I replied. "But I've reduced my hours a bit. 3 days a week instead of 4, with fewer weekend shifts." "That's good," Nathan said. "You worked too much for too long. It's time you had more balance." I nodded, still adjusting, to the idea that my reduced schedule, made possible partly by no longer subsidizing their mortgage, was something I should embrace rather than feel guilty about. "It's been nice having more time for myself," I admitted. "Though I still find it's strange sometimes having empty hours to fill." "Nathan mentioned you've been seeing someone?" Melanie's question was tentative, as if unsure whether this was acceptable territory. "Daniel, yes. It's still very casual, but enjoyable." I felt a smile tugging at my lips. "He's taking me to a jazz concert next weekend. You should bring him to dinner sometime," Nathan suggested, then glanced at Melanie as if checking whether he'd overstepped. To my surprise, she nodded in agreement. "We'd like to meet him," she added, her voice sincere despite the evident effort it took to extend the invitation. The conversation paused as Nathan cleared our dinner plates and Melanie brought out a simple dessert, fresh berries with whipped cream. As we began to eat, I noticed an exchange of glances between them, a silent communication that suggested something planned. "Mom," Nathan began, setting down his spoon, "we wanted to talk to you about something important." My heart skipped, anxiety flaring at his serious tone. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured me quickly. "Actually, better than fine." He reached for Melanie's hand again, the two of them sharing another look before he continued. "We're expecting a baby. Melanie's pregnant." The news hit me like a physical force, joy, surprise, and a complex tangle of emotions I couldn't immediately name. "A baby? That's wonderful news." The words came automatically, genuine despite my whirling thoughts. "It wasn't exactly planned," Melanie admitted, a vulnerability in her voice I'd never heard before. "We were still discussing whether the timing was right, and then, well, nature decided for us. I'm due in early December," she continued, her free hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We just had it confirmed last week." "Congratulations," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand, a gesture of connection I wouldn't have dared attempt months ago. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, nervous, excited." She gave a small laugh. "Sometimes all within the same 5 minutes." "That sounds about right for early pregnancy," I replied, remembering my own experience 30 years earlier. "It's a roller coaster." "We know the timing isn't ideal," Nathan said, his expression a mix of joy and concern. "The apartment is small, and we're still finding our financial footing, but we're committed to making it work." I looked around the modest apartment with new eyes, imagining it with a crib in the corner, baby toys scattered across the floor, the sounds of an infant filling the space. It was far from the grand nursery they might have created in the Oak Ridge house, with its spare bedrooms and spacious layout. But I'd raised Nathan in a home not much larger than this, managing just fine despite the space constraints. You'll adapt, I assured them. Babies don't need much space, just love and attention, and those you have plenty to give. We've been thinking a lot about priorities, Melanie said, her voice thoughtful. About what really matters for a child. Before everything changed, I had all these ideas about the right way to raise a baby. The right neighborhood, the right nursery furniture, the right preschool applications. She shook her head. Now I'm focused on being healthy, on creating a loving home, on being present. The rest seems less important. The transformation in her perspective surprised and moved me. This wasn't the status-conscious Melanie who had dismissed my gardening book and orchestrated elaborate social gatherings to impress her peers. This was a woman confronting the realities of impending motherhood with a new sense of what truly mattered. Those are the things that will make a difference to your child, I said softly. Trust me on that. Nathan cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. There's something else we wanted to discuss with you, Mom. About the baby. And about our future as a family. I waited, unsure what was coming next. We'd like you to be involved, he continued. Not just as a grandmother who visits occasionally, but as a regular presence in our child's life. Someone they see weekly who's part of their routine and their understanding of family. Tears pricked my eyes at the invitation. So different from the exclusion I'd felt in recent years. I would love that, I managed to say around the lump in my throat. We both would, Melanie added, meeting my gaze directly. I didn't understand before the bond between parent and child. How deep it goes, how essential it is. She hesitated. I regret the ways I tried to limit your relationship with Nathan. It was insecurity on my part and a misplaced sense of what our family should look like. Her honesty stunned me. I had never expected such direct acknowledgement of the dynamics that had contributed to our estrangement, particularly not from Melanie. Thank you for saying that, I said simply, unwilling to revisit old hurts when we were building something new. There's more, Nathan said, exchanging another glance with Melanie. With the baby coming, we've been thinking about our living situation. This apartment has been fine for the two of us, but with a child, we're starting to look at other options. My stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. Were they contemplating? Another financial overreach? Another house beyond their means? What kind of options? I asked carefully. Actually, Melanie replied, we've been looking at the Pine Hollow neighborhood, near your house. Pine Hollow, my modest middle-class neighborhood, with its ranch homes and split levels, its community pool and small playground. Nothing like the aspirational luxury of Oak Ridge Estates. The houses there are within our budget now, with my promotion and Melanie's new job starting next month, Nathan explained. And the neighborhood has good schools, parks within walking distance, and it would mean being closer to you, Melanie added quietly. For the baby, and for us. The significance of this choice, Melanie specifically wanting to live near me, prioritizing family connection over social status, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I think that would be wonderful, I said. Pine Hollow is a lovely place to raise a child. I have 30 years of evidence to support that, Nathan smiled, visibly relieved by my reaction. We've actually been approved for a mortgage on a house on Maple Street. It's a fixer-upper, needs some updating and TLC, but the bones are good, and it's within our actual budget this time. No secret arrangements necessary. The pointed reference to our past financial entanglement came without bitterness, almost as a shared understanding of lessons learned. I'm so proud of you both, I said, meaning every word, for making choices based on what you can truly afford, what truly matters. We've learned a lot, Melanie acknowledged. The hard way, maybe, but thoroughly. She hesitated. We were hoping, if you're willing, that you might help us with the house. Not financially, she added quickly, but with your experience, advice on renovations, maybe helping us paint or choose fixtures. The practical knowledge that comes from maintaining a home for decades. The request touched me deeply, not just the acknowledgement of skills I possess that could benefit them, but the desire to include me in creating their new home. A home built on realistic expectations and honest financial foundations. I would be honored, I said, and Daniel is surprisingly handy with home repairs. He renovated his own place after his wife passed. I'm sure he'd be happy to help too, if you'd welcome that. We would, Nathan confirmed, his expression softening. We want to know the people who matter in your life, Mom, just as we want you to be part of ours. As the evening continued, our conversation flowing more easily with each passing hour, I felt something settling within me. A sense of rightness, of pieces finally finding their proper places. The journey that had begun with secret mortgage payments and a painful confrontation was transforming into something I hadn't dared hope for. A genuine reconciliation, a new family configuration based on honesty rather than illusion. When I finally prepared to leave, Melanie surprised me with a hug. Slightly awkward but sincere. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and for being willing to start fresh with us. With me." "Thank you for inviting me back into your lives," I replied, returning the embrace carefully. "It means more than I can say." Nathan walked me to my car, the night air cool against our skin. "So, a baby," I said, still marveling at the news. "You're going to be a wonderful father." "I hope so," he replied, uncertainty flickering across his face. "I have a lot to figure out before December." "You will," I assured him, "and you won't be doing it alone." He nodded, looking at me in the glow of the parking lot lights. "I realized something recently, Mom. All those years you were supporting me, financially, emotionally, in every way possible. I never really saw you, not as a person separate from your role as my mother. I'm sorry for that." The acknowledgement, so long in coming, filled a space in my heart I hadn't realized was empty. "We're both seeing each other more clearly now," I said softly. "Maybe that's what had to happen for us to build something real." Driving home through the quiet streets, I thought about the evening we'd shared. The simple meal in a modest apartment, the honest conversations, the plans for a future that acknowledged reality rather than chasing illusions. And at the center of it all, the unexpected miracle of new life, a grandchild who would know me not as a secret financial support, but as a present, involved grandmother. The pain of the past year hadn't disappeared completely. There would still be moments of awkwardness, perhaps even tension as we navigated our new relationships. But for the first time since the mortgage revelation, I felt genuine hope, not just for reconciliation, but for something richer and more authentic than what we'd had before. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Daniel's car parked at the curb. He had offered to come over after my dinner, curious to hear how this significant reunion had unfolded. The sight of his vehicle, of someone waiting to share in my life's developments both difficult and joyful, reminded me that I too was building something new, an identity beyond motherhood, connections beyond family. We were all growing, learning, adapting. And perhaps that was the greatest gift to emerge from the painful rupture of our old patterns, the space to become more fully ourselves while remaining connected, the freedom to evolve without being trapped by expectations or illusions. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia to share the news about the baby. Next weekend, I would introduce Daniel to Nathan and Melanie. In the coming months, I would help them prepare a nursery in their new home in Pine Hollow. All ordinary actions, perhaps, but each representing extraordinary healing in a family that had nearly fractured beyond repair. For tonight, though, I would simply carry the warmth of our dinner with me, the promise of new beginnings, and the knowledge that sometimes When a carefully constructed facade crumbles, what emerges from the rubble can be stronger, truer, and more beautiful than what stood before. 1 year later. Just a little higher on the left side, I called up to Nathan, who balanced precariously on a ladder, hanging a welcome baby banner across the front porch of their Pine Hollow home. Daniel steadied the ladder from below, the two men working together with the comfortable familiarity that had developed over months of renovation projects. Like this? Nathan adjusted the banner, glancing down for my approval. Perfect, I confirmed, stepping back to admire the decorations we'd spent the morning arranging. Balloons in soft yellow and green, the gender-neutral colors Melanie had insisted on, bobbed gently in the autumn breeze. A wreath of autumn flowers adorned the front door, and a hand-painted sign announced, "Welcome home, Eleanor Patricia Hughes." Eleanor Patricia. My granddaughter, named for my mother and my sister, born 3 weeks ago after a marathon labor that had left all of us exhausted but overjoyed. Today marked her homecoming celebration, the official introduction of the newest Hughes to their extended circle of friends and family. They should be here any minute, I said, checking my watch. Melanie texted that they were leaving the hospital 30 minutes ago. Nathan descended the ladder, dusting off his hands with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Is everything ready inside? Food set up? Nursery finished? For the 10th time, yes, Daniel assured him, clapping a supportive hand on his shoulder. The house looks amazing, the food is arranged, and the nursery is picture perfect. Your daughter is coming home to a house filled with love and preparation. The transformation of the Pine Hollow house over the past year had been remarkable. What had started as a modest fixer-upper with outdated wallpaper and worn carpeting had evolved into a warm, welcoming home through months of weekend work. Daniel and Nathan had tackled the major repairs, replacing bathroom fixtures, refinishing hardwood floors that had been hidden under old carpet, painting every wall. Melanie had proven surprisingly adept at finding budget-friendly furnishings that combined style with practicality, while I had contributed experience and an extra pair of hands for countless projects. The nursery had been our collective masterpiece, Daniel. Crafting built-in bookshelves from reclaimed wood, Nathan painting a delicate mural of woodland creatures along one wall, Melanie selecting cozy bedding and curtains, while I restored the rocking chair that had once soothed Nathan as an infant. Here they come. Daniel pointed to a car turning onto the street. Nathan immediately straightened, nervously adjusting his shirt and running a hand through his hair. You look fine, I assured him, touched by his anxiety. Every bit the proud new father. We gathered on the front lawn as the car pulled into the driveway. Melanie emerged first from the passenger side, looking tired but radiant in a simple dress. Her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her mother, Eleanor Winters, exited the driver's side, her usual polished appearance somewhat softened by the grandma pin affixed to her blouse. The relationship between the Winters and our side of the family had evolved cautiously over the past year. Initial tension about Nathan and Melanie's downsizing had gradually given way to a respectful, if not entirely warm, acceptance. The impending arrival of a grandchild had proven a powerful motivator for putting aside old conflicts. Let me get her, Melanie said as Nathan approached, waving him back as she opened the rear door to unbuckle the infant car seat. With practiced movements that belied her new mother status, she lifted out the carrier containing our sleeping granddaughter. My heart swelled at the sight of the tiny bundle, her delicate features peaceful in sleep, one miniature hand curled against her cheek. Eleanor Patricia, Ellie, as we'd already begun calling her, was a perfect blend of her parents, with Nathan's dark hair and Melanie's heart-shaped face. Welcome home, little one, I whispered as they approached, resisting the urge to immediately reach for the baby. This was their moment, Nathan and Melanie bringing their daughter home for the first time, crossing the threshold of the house they had prepared with such care. Should we wait out here while you take her inside first? I suggested, recognizing the significance of the moment. Melanie shook her head, her expression softening as she looked at me. We want you all with us. This is a family moment. Family. The word carried new weight now, expansive enough to include all of us. The complicated, imperfect collection of people united by love for the sleeping infant in the carrier. Then let's go home, Nathan said, placing his arm around Melanie's shoulders and leading the way up the path. The house welcomed them with the warmth of late afternoon sunlight streaming through windows we had spent days cleaning and refurbishing. In the living room, a small gathering awaited. Patricia and her husband, a couple of Nathan's close friends from work, two of Melanie's friends who had stood by her through the transition from Oak Ridge to Pine Hollow, and Edward Winters, who stood somewhat awkwardly near the fireplace. "There she is!" Patricia exclaimed, moving forward to admire her namesake. "Oh, Nathan, Melanie, she's absolutely perfect." The next hour passed in a blur of quiet congratulations, admiration of the baby, and appreciation for the home Nathan and Melanie had created. I moved between groups, offering drinks and appetizers, watching with quiet joy as Eleanor was passed carefully from one pair of loving arms to another. In a quiet moment, I found myself standing beside Melanie's father, both of us observing the scene from a slight distance. "This isn't what I imagined for my daughter," Edward Winters said quietly, his gaze fixed on Melanie as she showed one of her friends the nursery. "This house, this neighborhood," I tensed, preparing to defend the modest home that had been transformed. "With such love and care." But he surprised me by continuing. "But she seems happier than I've seen her in years. More authentic somehow." The observation, so similar to my own thoughts, caught me off guard. "I think they've found what works for them," I replied carefully. "A life they can sustain and enjoy without constant pressure." Edward nodded, a flicker of something like regret crossing his face. "Her mother and I may have emphasized the wrong things in raising her, status, appearances. We thought we were preparing her for success." He gestured toward Melanie, who had returned to the living room and was laughing at something Nathan's friend had said, baby Ellie cradled comfortably in her arms. "But this looks more like success than the life she was living in Oak Ridge, the pa." Admission from this proud, status-conscious man touched me unexpectedly. "They've worked hard for this," I said. "Not just the house, but the understanding of what truly matters. It didn't come easily." "No, I don't imagine it did." He gave me a considering look. "You played a role in that understanding, I think. Even if the method was unconventional." Before I could respond to this oblique reference to the mortgage arrangement that had precipitated our family crisis, Nathan approached with Ellie in his arms. "Grandparents," he announced with a smile, "your granddaughter is requesting some quality time. Who's first?" Edward deferred to me with surprising grace. "Evelyn should go first. She's been waiting longer." The warmth of the tiny bundle in my arms brought tears to my eyes. The exquisite perfection of her miniature features, the soft weight of her against my chest, the unmistakable newborn scent that awakened memories of holding Nathan 31 years earlier. "Hello, sweet Ellie," I whispered, gently swaying in the instinctive rhythm that comes to all who have soothed infants. "Welcome to your home. Welcome to your family." As the afternoon progressed into evening, guests gradually departed until only the closest family remained. Melanie's parents left with promises to return the following weekend. Patricia and her husband headed home after one last adoring look at their niece. And finally, Daniel excused himself with a gentle kiss on my cheek and assurances that he was just a phone call away if needed. "You don't have to leave too, Mom," Nathan said as I began gathering my belongings. "You're welcome to stay longer." "You three need some time alone," I replied, recognizing their need for privacy in these first precious hours at home. "To settle in, to find your rhythm." Melanie, who had disappeared briefly to the nursery, returned with a small wrapped package. "Before you go," she said, holding it out to me, We wanted to give you this. A thank you for everything. The house renovations, the baby preparations, but mostly for giving us the chance to rebuild. Puzzled, I unwrapped the gift to find a silver picture frame. Inside was a photograph I didn't recognize. Nathan and Melanie standing in front of their Pine Hollow home, my arm linked through Nathan's, Daniel beside me, all of us smiling in the spring sunshine. "Turn it over," Nathan encouraged. I flipped the frame to find an engraved plate with a simple inscription. "Sometimes when something breaks, it creates space for something stronger to grow." The tears I'd been holding back all day spilled over. "It's beautiful," I managed, running my fingers over the engraving. "And true. We wanted you to have a reminder," Melanie said, her own eyes suspiciously bright, "of how far we've come, of what we've built together." Nathan nodded, shifting the now sleeping Ellie in his arms. Not just the house, but the family. The real family based on who we actually are, not who we were pretending to be. The contrast with the housewarming party at the Oak Ridge home couldn't have been more striking. The genuine connection we now shared instead of the careful performance of that earlier gathering, the honest affection in place of calculated social positioning. What had been lost in material luxury had been more than compensated for in authentic relationship. "I should still go," I said, carefully placing the frame in my bag. "But I'll be back tomorrow to help with whatever you need. Just call." "We will," Melanie promised, surprising me with a warm hug. "Thank you for everything, Evelyn. Truly." Nathan walked me to the door, Ellie still nestled against his shoulder. "I've been thinking a lot about that day," he said quietly, referring to the confrontation that had shattered our old patterns. "About how angry I was when I found out about the mortgage payments. I felt betrayed, infantilized." "I know," I acknowledged. "I'm still sorry for the secrecy, if not for the intention to help. The thing is," he continued, gazing down at his sleeping daughter, "I understand it differently now. The impulse to give your child everything, to shield them from hardship, to make their path easier." He smiled ruefully. "I've known Ellie for 3 weeks, and I already feel it. That drive to protect, to provide, to ensure she has every advantage." Understanding in his eyes, not just intellectual but felt, experiential, moved me deeply. "It's overwhelming, isn't it? That love." "Completely," he agreed. "And it helps me see that what you did, however misguided the method, came from that same place of overwhelming love." He shifted Ellie slightly, her tiny hand reflexively grasping his finger. "I'll probably make my own mistakes with her. Different ones, but mistakes nonetheless. All from trying to give her the best life possible. The difference," I said softly, reaching out to stroke Ellie's silky hair, "is that you and Melanie have already learned something it took me 63 years to understand. That the best life possible isn't about the biggest house or the most impressive lifestyle. It's about authenticity, connection, living within your actual means, both financial and emotional." "We had a good teacher," he replied with a smile. Even if the lesson came the hard way, as I drove home through the familiar streets of Pine Hollow, past the house where I had raised Nathan alone after Thomas left, past the community park where he had played as a child, past the small local businesses that had served our needs for decades, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle drawing closed in preparation for new beginnings. The pain of that October day when Nathan and Melanie had shut me out of their Oak Ridge home had transformed, through months of difficult conversations and careful rebuilding, into something I hadn't dared hope for. A family strengthened by crisis rather than destroyed by it. Relationships more genuine for having been tested and reconstructed with intention. And now, at the center of that reconstructed family, a new life. Eleanor Patricia, who would grow up in a home where authentic connection mattered more than appearances, where financial reality was acknowledged rather than disguised, where love was expressed through presence rather than material provision alone. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Daniel had left the porch light on for me, one of his thoughtful habits that had gradually transformed my house into our shared space over the past year. Inside, I found a note on the kitchen counter, propped against a vase of fresh flowers. Hope the homecoming was beautiful. Call me when you get in, no matter the hour. Love, D. The simple domesticity of it, the light left on, the waiting flowers, the casual expression of love, filled me with quiet joy. Like Nathan and Melanie, I too had found a new path forward, one that included companionship I hadn't sought, but now couldn't imagine living without. I placed the silver picture frame on the mantel, where the inscription caught the lamplight. Sometimes when something breaks, it creates space for something stronger to grow. How true that had proven to be. Not just for Nathan and Melanie, learning to build a life based on reality rather than aspiration, but for all of us. The painful breaking of old patterns had indeed created space for something stronger, more authentic, and ultimately more satisfying to grow in its place. I picked up the phone to call Daniel, to share the details of the day, to express the fullness of my heart. As it rang, I gazed once more at the photograph in its silver frame. The four of us standing before the modest Pine Hollow home, smiling with genuine joy rather than the careful social performance of earlier days. The mortgage payments that had once flowed secretly from my account to maintain an illusion had ceased, replaced by something far more valuable: honest connection, mutual respect, and the precious gift of being truly seen and known by those we love. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer those we love is the truth, not just about our finances or our capabilities, but about ourselves. And sometimes, when we release our grip on the narratives we've constructed about who we should be, we discover who we actually are, and find that reality, with all its limitations and complexities, offers a foundation far more stable than any fiction we could create. As Daniel answered with warmth in his voice, as I prepared to tell him about Ellie's homecoming and the unexpected moment of connection with Edward Winters, I felt gratitude wash over me for the breaking that had occurred, painful as it was, and for the stronger, truer life that had grown from those fragments. Some lessons come at great cost, but in the end, the price we paid, in pride, in illusion, in financial overreach, had purchased something beyond value: the chance to begin again, with clearer eyes and more authentic hearts. And that, I reflected as I settled into conversation, with the man who had unexpectedly become my partner, was a bargain at any price. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.